And transitioning from one M name to another M name, Mark Borchert, again, is with Travelers. He's our underwriting officer of Inland Marine. Mark, thank you so much for being on the show. I hope you are safe and sound from the storm that we just talked about for a little bit. How's everything going?
Doing well, Malcolm. Thanks for having me. Always happy to be here. Yeah, surprisingly, no snow in Minnesota, but very, very cold. High of -10 today. So
Oh my
we are
God.
bundled up.
-10. Is that what you just told me?
I did say that. Yes, we're used to it. Don't worry.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't imagine. I'm sitting here wearing a jacket right now and I'm freezing. It feels like it's 8 degrees here in Chattanooga, but listen, we're gonna get through it, and I'm gonna put you in the hot seat before you go back into the cold. How does that sound?
That sounds great.
Awesome, awesome. Well, keeping in, of course, with FreightWaves tradition, we generally tap into you as well as your team to set up expectations for the year ahead. So let's just start with a quick reflection back on 2025. Is there anything that stood out to you in particular?
Yeah, we went into 2025 hoping that the cargo theft rates would finally level out. We had seen, multiple years of kind of historic increases, specifically around strategic theft. And to some extent, those theft rates did level out. CargoNet reports that they showed only a 1% increase in theft events in the third quarter compared to the prior year. Now, that's just number of theft events. The bigger story is that in that same time period, the average value per shipment that was stolen nearly doubled.
Wow.
So that kind of tells us that the criminals are becoming more sophisticated, right? They're more selective about what they steal and how they're doing it. Another notable theme in regards to cargo theft was increased attention from regulators and law enforcement around fraud and cargo crime. However, those efforts are taking some time to show results, so that's an area we're continuing to monitor closely.
Turning the page now as we're in 2026, let's talk about freight fundamentals. What's going on right now in the market as we are currently now in almost the end of the first month of 2026,
It's flying by.
right?
High level, yeah, right. One development that we've seen in the freight environment appears to be working through some of the supply side imbalances that had built up over the last couple of years. After that kind of large oversupply of motor carriers during the COVID boom, it appears that right now we're heading into 26, we're getting closer to, I would say a healthy equilibrium in regards to the supply side of the freight marketplace. And when we see that happen and that supply side does get closer to that kind of equilibrium, we saw spot rates and tender rejections make a nice rebound in December for the industry, which we're hoping are going to carry forward into the first and second quarters here. From our perspective, when we're looking at these things, that adjustment process is pretty important. It tends to favor more consistent, sustainable freight market conditions over a longer period of time when we have that equilibrium. So we've also seen, some continued focus on compliance and carrier qualification. I'm sure you guys have probably talked about it here, but the FMCSA upgrading their user registration system. We like to see that, when the administrators are paying a closer attention to safety, documentation, and that kind of operational integrity, that supports a healthier risk environment overall. So we're hoping that it shows, results in reliable and stable motor carrier pool.
That's great stuff, Mark. And how are demands looking? Like, what are the biggest demand side risk you're kind of watching, and as well as the rest of your team as we move into 2026 as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. Demand that remains a pretty close area of attention. There's a lot of broader economic factors that influence that freight demand for both end consumers as well as companies, and those factors are continuing to evolve as we head into the new year. Uncertainty, I would say, is kind of the key theme here. When we look at the consumer side, spending has been pretty resilient over the last year, even with external pressures. So it's really worth watching how that evolves into 2026. Use home purchases as an example, right? A new home purchase usually results in multiple truckloads of demand for improvement projects, shipments of new furniture, maybe some appliances. Then, a brand new housing start that would mean even more shipments for building materials and things of that nature. So, trucking companies should be hoping for one, an improved housing market going into 2026, and for consumers to, continue that resilient spending that we saw over the last year. When we look at the commercial side, there's definitely still some uncertainty around manufacturing, import export volumes. That's going to have a pretty large impact on demand. So, whichever direction those head in 2026, that's going to be very tough to predict. A risk standpoint, demand uncertainty that like we have in the marketplace right now, that can introduce some increased pressure across the supply chain. So if those volumes shift unexpectedly, it can impact routing decisions, storage practices, and warehousing levels, even security controls. So all of that's pretty important considerations from our point of view and from an insurance perspective when we're looking at cargo.
Makes a lot of sense, Mark. One more question as it pertains to 2026. What changes in regulation, fraud, and security do you think will kind of have the biggest impact on the industry? I know that's a really broad question, but I know there's several factors that can contribute to this.
Yeah, there's a couple things that we're looking at, going into 26. We continue to see focus across the industry on fraud prevention and carrier legitimacy. And, we do a lot of work with that with our special investigations group here at Travelers too. So, registration processes, credential verification, compliance standards, those things are front and center, right? So, notably, like I had mentioned earlier, that new FMCSA registration portal that should hopefully help with some of those items. When we see increased scrutiny around who's allowed to operate and how that information is verified, it really influences how participants in the market approach that risk management. So that's what we like to see. Those processes can also add some friction on the front end for carriers, but they're generally aimed at improving transparency, right? And accountability. So that can result, hopefully, we would hope, in increased confidence in the information that shippers and brokers are getting about the motor carriers that they're working with. So that should improve the experience for everyone overall. A second item outside of the FMCSA registration would be, it's anyone's guess whether Congress will pass. There's currently proposed legislation that would address some of the concerns around fraud in the industry as well, including, implementation of a federal task force. So that would help with some of those cargo theft levels that we talked about earlier in the call too. Those conversations tend to be important because that's going to shape the long-term operating environment if we could get some legislation passed and a task force established and provide additional peace of mind for all of those in the trucking industry.
Mark, so looking ahead to the rest of 2026, if you had to put your finger on one thing that could really help trucking this year, what would it be?
For me, it's all about predictability, Malcolm. Trucking supply, like I said, appears to be in a healthier spot than it has been in years, but it's still subject to market conditions. And then demand is going to be the main thing to watch for me in 26 is the key variable. And really, it's anyone's guess as to which additional headwinds that the industry could face on that end. When these businesses have a clear sense of the operating environment, whether that's economic conditions or regulatory expectations or just the general market dynamics that we talked about, they're going to be better positioned to plan, invest, manage risk. So that broader, uncertainty has an impact on the trucking space. These periods of uncertainty can challenge these companies. So any better clarity we can get and consistency that helps the industry operate more smoothly will be key heading into the rest of the year.
That's definitely an important perspective, and also a good reminder of how closely trucking demand is tied to broader economic policy. It kind of just highlights, how much uncertainty is still in the system and what there is to be accomplished and done in 2026. Mark, thanks so much for being on the show today, man. I really hope that we get you back on here soon, and I'll get you out of the hot seat and back into the cold up there in Minnesota, man.
Appreciate it, Malcolm. Always enjoy the conversation.
Likewise, likewise. Thanks again, Mark.